Those of you who are staying, to open in your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 12. In the Pew Bible, that's page 1875. Page 1875 in the Pew Bible is Hebrews chapter 12. I'm going to read verses 4 through 13. Hebrews chapter 12, page 1875. We're going to start reading in verse 4, just beyond where we ended for our call to worship this morning. Hebrews chapter 12, starting in verse 4, reading through verse 13. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And have you completely forgotten this word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son? It says, "My son, do not make light of the Lord's discipline, and do not lose heart when he rebukes you. Because the Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastens everyone he accepts as his son. Endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. For what children are not disciplined by their father? If you are not disciplined, and everyone undergoes discipline, when you are not, then you are not legitimate, not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us, and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father of spirits and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best. But God disciplines us for our good, in order that we may share in his holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed." This is the word of the Lord. This is the Sunday of our annual meeting. And I'm leaving the Behold Our God series that we've been in this winter to look at a different text as we consider our church at the time of the annual meeting. The last time we had an annual meeting in a potluck was in 2020, just weeks before lockdown. 3 years ago. It was a different world. We are a different church in many ways. No need to rehearse. Do I need to rehearse everything that's happened in the last 3 years? We've talked about that quite a lot. But it's been a long period in the life of our church. It's been good in many ways, but very challenging in other ways. And in the last year, the changes and the challenges, as some of you may know, some of you may not know, but in the last year, the changes and the challenges have in some ways increased. We've had a number of staff challenges. We've had service and so all kinds of adjustments. We are realizing different issues we have with the building, working on trying to figure out how to solve accessibility, and we don't have space for all the groups that want to meet here or for all the children that we have downstairs, and how are we going to fix that? We have had a number of different challenges to work through, and we have done a lot of work to try to work through them. I wrote in my annual report for this year that in 2022, the leaders of this church endured what felt like, especially for the first 11 months, basically the whole year, have endured what felt like a never-ending series of challenges. It was a kind of stress test for the church. Much good came out of that. Much generosity and graciousness and service and commitment. But there was a lot that was also hard. There were conflicts which aren't in and of themselves bad, but which were wearying. There were moments in which disagreements were not handled perfectly, or leaders did not lead perfectly, in which I am sure I did not lead perfectly. And I have had to apologize to people. We have had a hard year in some ways. It's been a hard season. And when we came into January, I realized when I decided I was going to preach on this morning that it is not just in the church in general, but in recent weeks I had a number of conversations with people who were just in hard places in their life. Things that they were struggling with. Somebody, not necessarily bad, just feeling like not easy. I had someone say to me, "I know this is the right path, But I'm just asking God, why does everything have to be hard? And you add to all of that it's February. And I know it looks like spring outside today, but in this time of year, it's wearying in and of itself. And so we come to our annual meeting. And what are we to make of it? We've been in a challenging period, and you may be in a challenging period in your life, but it led me to think about a couple of things. This text, and even this text, I was thinking about another annual meeting in this church some years back, a lot of years back. When you go to the annual meeting potluck, should you go, please go today. When you walk into Perkins Hall, you'll see a drawing of a man, Dr. Wood. Have you noticed that in the hallway outside? Dr. Wood was pastor here for over 20 years. He started his first pastorate standing in this room. Think of it. He was standing in this place addressing his first annual meeting at the start of the First World War. Same room, same place that I'm standing now. He first came to the church. He looked out at a church that was in the middle of World War. He served altogether for over 25 years. In fact, he wrote 25 years later that he remembered taking the pulpit for his first annual meeting, looking out at a group of people, knowing we were in the midst of a world war, and saying, 25 years later, only a few who were present at that meeting are still present here with me tonight. And as he spoke, the nation was in the midst of the Second World War. He pastored through 2 world wars and the Great Depression. In the Second World War, 115 members of this church went into service. Can you imagine that? Losing 115 members? 6 were killed. He wrote annual reports, and I have them. You can see them. It would take too long to go through them. At the end, during all the years leading up to the World War and after the World War. But amazingly, in 1944, just a few years before he died, as he saw victory at hand for the Allied forces in 1944 for his annual report, having served for 25 years through 2 world wars and a Great Depression, he wrote these great words that I think capture the insight of our text, the truth in our text. 2 sentences back to back. It's the fact that these sentences are back to back that I think are really wonderful. These are the 2 sentences in 1944, his annual report. Never in all its history has the Church of Christ been confronted with more challenging problems than at the present time. That's how he felt. Never in all the history of the Church of Christ been confronted with more challenging problems than at the present time. Second sentence, there is a growing conviction that the supreme opportunity of the church lies just ahead. That's a Christian speaking. A Christian is the kind of person who knows the church to be in the hands of God, who looks at difficulty and knows and names them as real, as hard, and yet says, though things are hard, the supreme opportunity for the church is just around the corner. Because the church, the Christian, is in the hands of God, not at the mercy of circumstances. And God, when God is at work, there is reason for this kind of perspective and this kind of hope. This text teaches this. And these are the 3 points that I want to pull out this morning and what that means for us as a church and for you if you are struggling with hardship here. 3 points. Here's what they are from Hebrews chapter 12, verses 4 through 13. Hardship is normal. That's the first one. Hardship is normal, but you're in your Father's hands. Second point. And holiness and a harvest will be the result. That's the third point. Hardship is normal, but you're in your Father's hands, and holiness and hardship will be the result. Hardship is normal. Look at chapter 12, verse 4. This is what the writer to Hebrews writes to these Christians he's writing to. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. That's a strong word. I know things are tough, but they could be worse. You haven't bled yet. What kind of opposition are they facing? If you read through the book of Hebrews, you see that this church is a church that is struggling. They are struggling in very real ways, and the struggle is coming from 2 different places. There is a struggle that is coming at the church from out there, the circumstances that are coming upon them, and that is coming from in here, in the church, in the people themselves. out there and in here. The pressure from out there is coming from sinful men. Look at verse 3, right before verse 4. He says, "Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners," or some translations say from sinful men, "so that you will not grow weary and lose heart. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood." Opposition from sinners. They were facing some opposition from their culture, real opposition, real oppression, some forms of persecution. In chapter 10, verses 32 to 34, it lists what those kinds of things are. Some had been in their earlier days. It doesn't seem like they were at this time, but in earlier days in the life of the church, they had suffered at the hands of their opposition. They were exposed, it says in chapter 10, to insult and persecution. Sometimes they stood side by side, he says, with others who were suffering insult and persecution. Some were put in prison. Some lost their property. There was out there circumstances. There were real opposition. There was real opposition that was coming against the church. And the response to this, wonderfully, is not just to say, what are you doing wrong that you're facing so much opposition? That's never the response in the Bible. Instead, it's a refreshing realism. Well, it could be worse. Others have suffered more. This is what it means. Hardship in the Christian life is normal. Not just hardship from out there, but also hardship from in here. There are real struggles that we face, even within ourselves. If you go back to chapter 12, verse 1, you get another kind of picture of the kind of hardship that the author has in mind as he's talking about this. He says in chapter 12, verse 1, "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles." Everything that hinders. It's a very intentionally broad term. It could be persecution. It could just be hard times, difficult circumstances. Hardship is normal from out there, but it's also a struggle in here and the sin that so easily entangles. We don't just have a battle against out there. We have a battle in here. Have you ever noticed that? To do what is right. In fact, the hardship that comes at us from out there and the hardship that we face in here, those two are bound up together. We have temptations and tendencies that may come out in this fallen world, because in times of discouragement, there may be sins that we want to turn to comfort ourselves, or that we fall back into. In times of discouragement, we might just find coming up in ourselves things that we don't really like. Have you ever noticed, the world that we are facing can sometimes have an effect and bring things out of us that are not our best. Have you ever noticed that? I had to fast this last week for a medical procedure, and I am always amazed by the way that my emotions are affected by not eating. Just my fast. My wife once said, we were talking about we were in a Bible study talking through how Esau sells his birthright for a little porridge. He gives this very valuable thing away for a bowl of stew. And my wife said, well, actually, that does make sense to me. The men in my life don't make good decisions when they're hungry either. Something like that. She's right. There's a reality, and think about it, when you are suffering, when you are hurting, sometimes what we see come out of us, we want to turn to things that we shouldn't turn to for comfort. We respond in ways we shouldn't respond. The struggle, the hard struggle to follow Jesus is the combination of things coming at us from out there and things that are in here. And yet the author, again, does not say, what are you doing wrong that you're struggling? He says, keep going. He assumes hardship, in fact, is normal. Hardship is standard issue Christianity. And we should just say that because we live in a very prosperous, comfortable time, and there are plenty of preachers out there who would say, if you're struggling, you must be doing something wrong. You don't have enough faith, or you need to overcome it, or there are realities to that. But we need to know that actually what the Bible says is that following after Jesus is often going to be difficult. That's standard issue Christianity. It doesn't mean you're doing something wrong if following Jesus is hard. We should remember that as well because social media makes it look like everybody puts their best foot forward on social media. So if you're on social media and you're looking at it, everything's hashtag blessed. And you look at it and you say, wow, this is amazing. Everybody's doing great. What's wrong with me? No, everybody's only putting on social media what's going great. But if someone is following Jesus, the Bible says, everyone, Paul says, who wants to follow Jesus will suffer opposition, persecution, difficulty. So hardship is normal, which is helpful to know. This is part of what it means to follow Jesus. And in fact, it's part of what we admire in others. In chapter 11, Hebrews chapter 11, there's a list what's sometimes been called the Hall of Faith. People who lived for Jesus. And what you notice if you read through there, people who lived by faith, what you notice if you read through that this afternoon is that these people all faced hardship, but they faced it with faith. And that made them heroes. Hardship is normal. That's the first thing, is a refreshing realism about the text. But that leads to further encouragement. Hardship is normal, but you're in your Father's hands. In verses 5 through 8, the writer turns to talk about how to give us a different perspective on hardship. He says this in verse 5, and have you completely forgotten the word of encouragement? Now, catch that, he's encouraging us here. The word of encouragement that addresses you as a father addresses his son. He quotes from Proverbs chapter 3, and then says in verse 7, that very clearly, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as his children. Now, I wonder what your reaction is to that. Some of you might find this troubling or confusing, or at the very least wonder, how are you encouraging us right now? But this is encouragement. Listen, what the author is saying, there are so many. I want to show you the many encouraging parts to this. But what this author is saying is, Christian, hardship is normal, but you are not at the mercy of your circumstances. You are in your Father's hands. He's saying hardship is normal, but the circumstances you are facing, you are not facing alone. Rather, you are in your Father's hands. You are not standing alone as you face this. You are in your Father's hands. And what the author is going to say here, he's not addressing the out there. He's not addressing all of our questions about why we suffer and why hard things happen and what God's going to do with the people who are making our life miserable. He's not addressing that. Instead, he's not addressing the out there. He is turning to the church and saying, listen, hardship is coming at you from out there, but what in the Lord's hands, when you are in your Father's hands, he takes these hard circumstances and he turns them into discipline by which he begins to work on your in here. By which he begins to take these hard circumstances and train you and change you and do good work in you. That's what he's saying. You're in your Father's hands. These verses are about how God uses the pressure that comes on us to do good work in us. And he makes clear this discipline. He pulls this analogy, this metaphor out to talk about how discipline is for our good. He says, actually in verse 10, there's a qualification. He talks about the example of our own parents. And it is true, if you're a parent, you might know this. If you're a child of a parent, you might have experienced this. Responsible parents who love their children discipline the children that they love. True love does not mean protecting your kids from the consequences of every decision or keeping your kids from the kinds of challenges that will help them to grow. Love does not mean letting your kids do whatever they want to do all the time. Does anyone agree with that? This is the responsible parents discipline, they train, they form their children. And he says, look, our parents, our fathers, is using this example, they disciplined us for a little while as they thought best. I read a number of commentators. He's saying, look, your fathers did the best that they could with their limited wisdom. He is not saying all of your fathers were perfect. He's saying, look, I hope a lot of them were trying their best. They didn't get it all right, but they were working hard. But your heavenly Father takes hardship into his hands, and he will use it. He will use it for your good. That's what he says, for your good. The Lord not taking us out of hard circumstances, but working on us in hard circumstances, is the Lord working in us for our good. It's a sign, in fact, he says, that you belong to your Father when you have this sense that God is working in you in these hard circumstances. He says, if you were not disciplined, verse 8, and everyone undergoes discipline, then you're not legitimate, you're not true sons and daughters at all. He says, look, take it as a sign that the Lord loves you. He's disciplining you. He's working in you. If you go into Walmart this afternoon and you see someone else's kid getting into trouble, you might say, who's going to take care of that kid? Right? Unless they're not hurting themselves, you say, where's their parent? Now, if I walk into Walmart and my kid is doing something, I'm going to walk right over and say, excuse me, come here, right? The Lord is dealing with you as children because you're His. That's what He's saying. And He works with us for our good by taking the hard things that happen to us and in His hands using them to work in us. That's helpful truth, and it's hopeful truth. Sometimes the way the Lord uses these circumstances is by having us face and taste some of what does this mean? How does the Lord do this? I think some of this is by what this brings out in us. Sometimes discipline is by facing some of the consequences of our sin. Sometimes we get a taste. The Lord gives us the consequences of what we've done wrong so that we could turn from it. Sometimes we find in hard circumstances that the attitudes of our hearts are revealed, and we need to confess them and bring them to the Lord. Sometimes we find that in conflict or in challenge or in difficult circumstances, what's revealed are our blind spots. My son is learning how to drive. He's 16. And we've been talking about blind spots. I told him the story. I rode once on a mission trip in the back seat of a Suburban that was towing a trailer with a driver who never checked his blind spots. He was towing a trailer. And so I sat back there, and it was a loud thing. And I just sat back there watching my life flash before my eyes again and again as he would change lanes and people would honk and he'd be like, hey, and he would just come over. You have blind spots. You and I, the image of blind spots is things that we don't naturally see until it's revealed to us. One of the things the Lord does in hard circumstances is reveal to us the sins that we have that we don't even see, where we're just running over other people or moving in directions that are not glorifying to God, and He shows them to us. The Lord deals with us in difficult ways for our good. And so He says in verse 7, endure hardship as discipline. God is treating you as children. Look to the Lord. Don't resist hardship. Look in it to see, Lord, what would you want to do in me? What would you want to address? What would you want to teach me? Hardship is normal, but you and I are in our Father's hands, and He takes the stuff that comes on us to do good work in us, out of His love for us. And when He does this, there is a wonderful result. This is the helpful word of what hard times produce when they are in the Father's hands. Verse 11, no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. But later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. In fact, right before that, he says, God disciplines us for our good in order that we may share in His holiness, that we may share in God's holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful, but it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. This is the great word of hope for those who face hardship in the hands of God. God will not fail, this is the promise, to take even these hard things and use them in us and through us for great good. To make us, he says, holy. And to bring out of us, through these circumstances, a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. This training we know will be successful because it's the training that Jesus has modeled for us. He himself who endured suffering in order that there might be a great harvest, a joyful harvest of righteousness and peace for us who have been brought to the Father through him. The life of the church is in the hands of God, which means hardship is normal, but we're in our Father's hands, and he uses hardship to make us holy and for a harvest of righteousness and peace. Here's what the text teaches. This is the kind of perspective that says these might be some challenging days, and yet the greatest moment might be just around the corner because God takes hardship and turns it into a harvest. So what then do we do together? What then do we do? And the last two verses of our text give us just some direct encouragement and instruction. Two parts for those who believe it, for the church who would follow and trust in this truth. Verse 12 and verse 13. Therefore, that means because of what he's just been talking about in verses 4 through 11. Therefore, because this is true, therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. Two pictures here. One is a picture for the individual. The other is a picture for the church. Two pictures. Here's one. Strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. Some of your translations may say, strengthen your dragging arms, your weak arms and your weak knees. This is a picture. This is an address to those in the church who are feeling like, who are starting way down under the pressure, are starting to feel like maybe I should give up. And the word is, don't give up. Brace yourself to keep going. Pull up your arms. Stand up. Put on a knee brace. I, a couple of years ago, was running and got a massive water on my knee. I don't know. What do you call it? Robbie looked at it. What he said. In medical terms, I had water on my knee. This big thing. And one of the ways you do that is by putting a brace on your knee, a compression brace that begins to push it out. He is saying that idea of strengthen the weak knees. Pull on a brace. Do what you have to do. Straighten up. Don't keep dragging and just dropping backwards. Straighten up. Fix your eyes on Jesus. Don't give up. The worst thing that you can do if you're feeling this weight of opposition is to stop. Instead, he says, fix your eyes on Jesus and commit that you're going to keep going. Do what you need to do to keep on the path. Don't drop out of the race. Determine today that because the Lord loves you and because God is your Father who has promised never to leave you, you will day by day say, Lord, I'm going to keep going forward. There's a poem that Elisabeth Elliot, a missionary whose husband Jim was killed by the Auca Indians, there was a poem that she made famous called Do the Next Thing. It was a poem from, I'm not sure where it's from. I haven't been able to find online who actually wrote it, just that Elisabeth Elliot often said it. But it's this very common sense piece of wisdom for those who are struggling to know how to keep following the Lord. It says, the repeated refrain is, child of the Father, just do the next thing. This is what it says. Strong in his faithfulness, praise and sing. As God beckons thee, do the next thing. Moment by moment, let down from heaven, time, opportunity, and guidance are given. Fear not tomorrows, child of the King. Trust them to Jesus and do the next thing. Do it immediately. Do it with prayer. Do it reliantly, casting all care. Do it with reverence, tracing his hand, who placed it before thee with earnest command. Stayed on omnipotence, safe beneath his wings, leave all results and do the next thing. Do the next thing. Strengthen feeble arms and weak knees. Commit to keep following Jesus and following him together. The second command is a command to the church, I believe. Make level paths for your feet so that the lame may not be disabled, but rather healed. This is a command now to the church to say, if you see brothers and sisters who are struggling to walk, clear the way for them. Make the path straight. Clear out. Come alongside them. Don't just, if you're running strong right now and you're going forward, don't just say, I'm doing good. Look ahead. Look around. Look behind you. See who might be struggling and say, how can I clear the path so that you can come as well? Clear the path. Get those things out of the way that may cause them to stumble and be hurt, so instead they may continue and be healed. And this is the call to the church as well in the midst of hardship, knowing that our Father loves us, that we would look at one another who are loved by our Father, so that we might care for one another and encourage one another and help one another get to the end. Who are you encouraging in their walk with Jesus? Who are you praying for? How often are you looking around, getting to know other people and seeing where the needs are in order that we may encourage one another to get to the end? There's a character in Pilgrim's Progress called Mr. Greatheart. Mr. Greatheart is, in Bunyan's obvious allegorical style, a man with a great heart. And that great heart is in order to encourage others. He says at one point to these other pilgrims that are struggling, brother, you must go along with us, one who is tempted to stop. Brother, you must go along with us. We will wait for you. We will lend you our help. We will deny ourselves some things for your sake. We will be made all things to you rather than let you be left behind. That's what it's commanding. Hardship is normal, but in our Father's hands, it results in a harvest of righteousness and peace and in order to make us holy. This year has been a difficult year, and there might be more difficulty to come. That does not mean that we are out of the will of God. It does mean that we need to fix our eyes upon Jesus, commit to keep following Him, and commit further to look at one another and say, how can we help one another keep moving forward with Jesus? May the Lord knit us together in love and lead us forward in following Jesus. Would you join me in a word of prayer? I invite you to use these few moments to ask the Lord to speak His word to your heart before we close in song together this morning.